Hey guys, so today we're going to be looking at Andrew Jackson's administration and kind of the changes that as president he brought to our country. But before we can get into Jackson, we kind of have to get a little bit of background here. Okay, so remember where we've been, era of good feelings, right? 1817 to 1825, the administration of Monroe. Things are going great. There's the Missouri Compromise. We got Florida. We admitted some states to the Union. We totally intimidated Europe so they would run away from us, right? Things are great. Sort of, things seem okay, nationalism, whatever. Except, as we know, nothing really ruins a good time, like money problems, like I can't go to the club because I'm broke, right? Kind of sucks. So, Panic of 1819 hits. 1919, there's an economic recession, and people are kind of looking to the government like, what are we going to do, right? Well, the problem is we've got the second bank in the United States in place, and it doesn't really do a good job coping with it. It doesn't really solve the problem, and so people are kind of suffering. There's economic issues, right? We also have slavery, of course. So the North is all industry, the South is all King Cotton. This equals to sectionalism, and as we saw, this is starting to cause a lot of tension in the country, right? So this is kind of where we are in 1824. So in 1824, the election is between John Quincy Adams, the son of Andrew Jackson, that's this guy right here, this is the scary picture, and Andrew Jackson, okay? Andrew Jackson, we've seen him, he's a popular general, right? Fought War of 1812, he'd been fighting Native Americans in Florida in the Seminole Wars down there. He had actually fought some British pirates and got them hanged, right? Like he legit hanged them like they were murderers. Not cool, Andrew Jackson. But he was still really popular across the country, right? Andrew Jackson and John Quincy Adams are super close in this election, right? Like super, super close. So much so that Jackson kind of has a majority, but it's not enough to win. It's not an easy enough majority. So the vote goes to the House of Representatives. So that's what happens when one candidate doesn't get the right majority. It goes to the House, and the House decides. So the House, it's really, really tight, right? Like they don't even know who they're going to vote for. So Henry Clay is the Speaker of the House. Henry Clay hates Andrew Jackson. Just look at this quote here. I cannot believe that killing 2,500 Englishmen in New Orleans qualifies Jackson for the various difficult and complicated duties of the presidency. Like, homeboy just shot at some redcoats from behind a barrel of straw. That don't mean he gonna make a good president, right? In fact, Henry Clay thinks he's gonna make a terrible president. So Henry Clay starts doing some wheeling and dealing behind the scenes, and he ends up getting it decided that John Quincy Adams is going to be elected as president, okay? This makes Andrew Jackson furious, okay? So by the time of 1828, when the next election comes in, Andrew Jackson runs again, and he is going to do everything in his power to make sure he wins this election, okay? So much so that he is bad-mouthing John Quincy Adams in the press. He's making up lies about him, like going at him, right? Because he saw the election 24 as what he called a corrupt bargain, like a behind-the-scenes wheel and deal, and he was really upset. He thought that it lost him the election, and it did, right? So in 1828, Old Hickory, which is Andrew Jackson's nickname, gets a do-over. So the voting requirements are changed at this point. So more common men are able to vote. They get rid of the land requirement. So people that don't own land can vote, which is great. Andrew Jackson runs as a Democratic Republican, but not Jefferson's Democratic Republican. Jackson's running mate was a guy named Martin Van Buren. He basically invented his own party. And so this is huge. And as he invents his own party, people who don't like Jackson invent the Whig Party. And the Whig Party is the one that is running against him. So the Democratic Republicans are more like today's Democrats than Thomas Jefferson's were. The idea is that they are appealing to the common man. Jackson's like, I was born in like a log cabin. I got like a third-grade education. I'm just like y'all, man. Like I'm your homeboy, right? Vote for me. He does win the election with this. John Quincy Adams, so like his father, does not get 2 terms. Just as an aside, poor old John Q.A., like he gets kind of a bad rap. He probably could have been a better president if he had had more time. In 1830, he becomes the first former president who is elected to the House of Representatives. He is a very strong abolitionist. He's kind of like the main anti-slavery voice in Congress. He continues his law career, argues some very successful cases, including the Amistad case, which we're going to talk about a little bit more as we move on. But in February of 1841, he dies after suffering a stroke on the floor of a house while giving a speech. So the man, like, he was in politics until the day he died. So, he wasn't, didn't get a great shot as president, but maybe, things turned out for the best. So, before we talk about Andrew Jackson, irony is Andrew Jackson on a central bank note, or a 20, right? Why is that? Why is that irony? Ms. Jones, you're so weird. Like, what are you talking about? Well, you're going to find out why that's weird, okay? So keep this in mind, but of course, as I said, Andrew Jackson on the 20. We're going to talk about why that's strange. Okay, so the first problem that Andrew Jackson faces as president is needing to appoint a cabinet. Well, that's not really a problem. Every president does that. So Andrew Jackson decides he wants to reward his political supporters as he becomes president. Well, unfortunately, what this means is he's not necessarily appointing good people to his cabinet, right? So Andrew, what he does is he fires 10% of federal employees. You're gone. What'd I do? You're standing in my way. I don't want you here. Bye-bye. Right? Be gone. Go. Right? There's actually a bit of a longer story to that, but we'll talk more about that later. So he fires 10% of federal employees, and then he installs something called the spoil system, where basically he gives jobs to his friends, right? Like, hey man, you did me a solid back in the War of 1812. Thanks, man. You want to be Secretary of State? I got you. You Secretary of State now. Can I see your qualifications? Like, why do you deserve to be Secretary of State? I did Andrew Jackson a solid back in the day, right? No, it doesn't. No. That's the spoil system, giving jobs to your friends, okay? This is something that's going to happen in the government until the 1900s. And as you can imagine, it makes government kind of inefficient because government's not already inefficient enough, right? So this is a big deal. The other thing that comes to this is he has unlimited access to friends who are not actually in government positions. This is called the kitchen cabinet, okay? So the kitchen cabinet is basically like a group of guys who they come back door and like knock on the kitchen door and be like, what up, Holmes, you want to play some cards? And so they'd be sitting around the table playing cards with Andrew Jackson and be like, nah man, that's Second Bank of the United States, that's pretty whack, you should do something about that. So these guys are basically influencing Andrew Jackson without even being in positions of power. So the kitchen cabinet is the nickname that they get from the American people, being like they could come in through the kitchen door, right? And it wasn't seen as a good thing. So this kind of leads to an increase in corruption in the federal government. The next thing that we have is presidential veto, okay? Which bills are we going to pass and which we're going to get rid of, right? Before Jackson, so from George Washington to John Quincy Adams, right? They only would veto bills that they saw as unconstitutional. If they didn't think it was a good bill, if they thought it went against the Constitution, they would veto it. Even if they didn't like the law, they would still sign it, right? Because, the people had passed it, and that's great. No, not Andrew Jackson, man. He ain't like that. He ain't gonna put up with that crap. No, Andrew Jackson, he vetoes bills he don't like. Or, he vetoes bills that are proposed by people he don't like, right? Say, what? What? So just an example of this. Hates Henry Clay, right? Because he saw Henry Clay as the leader of that corrupt bargain. Henry Clay was trying to get a road in Maysville passed to build a national road, right? Well, this is there's nothing wrong with this bill. There's nothing wrong with this law. We just want to build a road, right? Nah, Andrew Jackson's like, veto! I don't like that Henry Clay. Veto, 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 right? So, that's rude, right? He vetoes more bills than all the presidents before him. Now, granted, there were not that many presidents before him, but it's still a really big deal. And people kind of say that he's using the veto power to take too much power as the government. This does change the standard for presidential vetoes. So today, the standard is veto bills you don't like, right? If you don't think it's a good bill, veto it, right? Doesn't matter if you think it's constitutional or not. Veto. right? The next problem we have is the Native Americans, okay? So here's the problem. In the South, there's a lot of Native Americans in the South. But as the South is starting to expand, there are a lot of white settlers who want Native American land, okay? Well, a lot of tribes are starting to figure it out. And they're like, y'all, this ain't gonna work for us, right? The Cherokee had done something really interesting, where they had actually started to willingly assimilate into American culture, but they did it as a way that they could fight back, right? So the Cherokee have started to say, this is not right, okay? So the Cherokee, they go to the federal government and say, you can't do this. Well, Jackson passes a law in 1830 called the Indian Removal Act, where all natives in the Georgia area are forced west to Oklahoma, what they call at that time Native American Indian Territory, okay? Well, who said we have to go, right? Like, you don't even consider us American citizens. We're not American citizens. Why do we have to go? The Cherokee go all the way to the Supreme Court in a court case called Worcester versus Georgia. John Marshall agrees with the Native Americans, right? What he says is, they are a separate nation. Yes, they live on American soil, but they are an independent nation, and laws that we make can have no say on what happens to the Cherokee. Cool, right? So they don't have to move. Yeah, except Jackson calls him out. John Marshall has made his decision, now let him enforce it. What's the Supreme Court going to do if I don't do what they said? Didn't think about that, right? Who enforces the laws in this country? The president. So the president says, screw you, John Marshall. They got to go, right? So Jackson, first of all, could have been impeached for that, right? Put on trial, kicked out of the presidency. He is not, because he's so popular. Maybe an oversight, right? Natives are forced west. They're forced west on a trail of tears that's 800 miles, mostly on foot, in the winter. The army oversaw them. They would beat people who fell behind, whether they were old or sick, didn't matter. Almost a quarter of Native Americans died. Some of them managed to hide in the mountains, in the Appalachian Mountains, and that's why we still have, reservations of Cherokee in North Carolina and Georgia still today. But the predominant number of them did move, and this is a really, really big black mark on American history, that this was even allowed to happen. And Andrew Jackson did not care. He did not like Native Americans. Remember, he had fought Native Americans. He was like, Native Americans be whack. I don't even like them. I don't even care. Like, it didn't matter to him. The next we have is the Tariff of Abominations, or the Nullification Crisis. So, a tariff is passed, right? South Carolina doesn't like it. They don't want to pay the tariff, okay? Now, remember, what's a tariff? Okay? It's a tax on imported goods, right? So why in the world does South Carolina not want to pay the tariff? So think about the economy of the South, right? They are importing most of their goods. Most manufactured goods are produced in the North, imported into the South, or imported from foreign countries into the South. So if the tariff is a tax on imported goods, it's going to make the manufactured goods in the South much more expensive. Well, John C. Calhoun is the vice president. He's a Southerner, all right? He's from South Carolina. Andrew Jackson is a Southerner. John C. Calhoun assumes Andrew Jackson's going to be on our side, right? Because he's a, slave-holding plantation owner, right? Like, he's got this. He doesn't, right? He actually agrees with the federal government on this. The South believes that this tax is unfair. So, what's going to happen, okay? Well, here's what happens. South Carolina, specifically, or the South, specifically South Carolina, threatens to nullify the tariff. John C. Calhoun writes a document called the South Carolina Exposition, in which he lays out all of the reasons he has the right to nullify this tariff. Andrew Jackson goes berserk, right? So, the other thing that Calhoun says is that if you don't nullify this tariff, we have the right to secede or withdraw from the Union, okay? So that's going to come up again later. We've already seen it once with the Chesapeake up north during the War of 1812. So now the South is saying that we have the right to do it. So, like I said, Jackson goes berserk. Jackson says, no, you have to pay the tariff whether you like it or not. Screw you. Calhoun, vice president, He resigns, says, I'm not going to deal with this mess. The states' rights issue is debated in Congress. This is known as the Webster-Haynes debates. You need to know that. So basically, do they have the right to do this? Who should have the more rights, the state or the federal government? And South Carolina rebels and threatens to secede. Jackson says, you cannot do this. And he passes what's called the Force Bill, where he says, I'm going to send the army down to South Carolina, and I'm going to make you pay the freaking tariff. Okay? Whoa. Whoa. Nelly. Okay. You're going to send the army against Americans? Whoa. Right? So, South Carolina backs down a little bit. War is averted. Henry Clay, our marriage counselor, comes up with a compromise. He says, look, okay, we'll pass this new tariff. And this new tariff will gradually decrease over 10 years. That way, the federal government can get their money from the taxes, but eventually the prices will go down, right? Like, you're cool with that, right? South Carolina agrees, and the problem is averted. But it almost came to blows. The Civil War almost happened in 1828, right? That's a big deal. Really big deal, okay? The last one that we have is the bank war, okay? So the national charter is about to expire on the National Bank. And they have to figure out whether or not we're going to let the charter expire. There's actually a guy named Nicholas Biddle. Nicholas Biddle is in charge of the bank, and he wants to extend the charter, okay? So he tries to get a law passed through Congress saying, let's get this bill extended. Jackson doesn't like that. No. Remember, he's still a Democrat. He doesn't like the National Bank at all. He hates the National Bank, in fact. And he wants it to go away. So this quote, Van Buren is his vice president after Calhoun resigns. He says, the bank, Mr. Van Buren, is trying to kill me, but I will kill it. Right? Oh, Nelly. Andrew Jackson just declared war on the National Bank. Let's see what happens. So, Jackson vetoes the bill to recharter the bank. He kills it. Right? So the National Bank is set to expire and it's going to die. Right? He actually, in order to do this, has to go through like 3 or 4 different secretaries of the Treasury to get this done. He takes all the money from the National Bank and puts them in state banks owned by his friends. These get nicknamed the pet banks. Okay? So basically, all of these, all this federal money is now being funneled from the federal government to all these different state banks. Okay? How do you think that's going to go? Well, first of all, now all these state banks are like, ooh, we can print money. Yeah, what? So they start printing money, which, more money in circulation, that would seem like a good thing, except that's going to lead to the increase in inflation. All right? So it's actually not such a good thing. The second thing that this leads to is the Panic of 1837. Okay, so this is actually after Jackson's administration. Martin Van Buren is going to be the president after Jackson, and it's going to happen during his, but it's because of the state banks. Okay, so Panic of 1837 happens. The economy crashes. Like, this is the precursor to the Great Depression, essentially, right? So banks stop accepting people stop accepting paper money because it basically has no value at all. Right, like they printed so much of it, the paper money is essentially worthless. Well, when that happens, the banks start closing. When banks start closing, businesses start closing. When businesses start closing, people lose their jobs. Unemployment goes up. People blame Martin Van Buren for this. Poor guy gets all of the brunt, all because Andrew Jackson declared war on the banks and Nicholas Biddle, and just wanted to close the banks up, right? Basically, Andrew Jackson ruined the national economy, hated the federal bank system, and we put him on the 20. Homeboy be rolling in his grave knowing he's on a central bank note because he hated the central bank, right? So it's kind of ironic. I kind of think it's a slap in the face to Andrew Jackson. So this is just kind of an overview of Andrew Jackson's presidency. We're going to look at the effect of it and kind of how the people viewed Andrew Jackson and whether or not he was a good president or not. My bias probably came out a little bit in here. We'll see what you guys can figure out. So I will see you in class. Goodbye.